Yvonne, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Paulina. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
I'm so excited for this conversation. So when we first met, you told me something that stuck with me and I wrote it here. You said, freedom means you can talk to your friend, criticize the government, and then forget about it and go home. Where I'm from, if you criticize the government, you're not going to make it home. So the ability to forget about it and to speak freely without fear is kind of a luxury of a free society. Can you set the stage for us and explain why this was true in Zimbabwe where you grew up and how you came to realize this?
Well, Zimbabwe, if you know anything about it, is that it is a country that has been under a dictatorship now for 44 years. So since 1980, when Zimbabwe became independent, the man who took over the country started off, looking like he was going to do well, but increasingly became dictatorial and then stayed on until he was in power for almost 40 years. And part of the process of him staying in power means that anyone who criticized him or anybody that spoke up against him or that had a different idea to him in terms of governance was not allowed to speak. And so that became the norm in Zimbabwe in terms of people being afraid to speak up or people being afraid to talk about what they thought about what was, good or best for the country. And so that for me became something that was actually normal, that you do not criticize the president.
And you don't criticize the president in like a public setting or like privately with friends too?
I think in both settings, you have to be very careful where you criticize the president. You don't do it. It's particularly in public. You don't do that in public, right? And then in private as well,
you start to self-censor.
You check, who am I with? Before I speak and before I say it. And I meant that when I said you don't criticize the president publicly and forget about it and go home and go and have coffee with your friends. No, you start to think about where do I go to escape or to hide or to be safe. You watch your back after doing something like that.
Do you think that created a sense of almost paranoia with like what you say, who you're with?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That idea of the walls have ears is a very real sense where I come from. And particularly when we then began to do what we were doing in terms of beginning to help people to find the courage to speak up, which started off accidentally. I didn't want to do that because I knew very well the kind of trouble you could get into. But once the journey began, what we began to try to teach people was, no, wait, not only do you have the right to be able to speak up, you also have the ability to do it and to face whatever consequences come after that because you're in the right. But it's making the jump to understand that, number one, I'm in the right. And number two, that I do have, because I'm in the right, I have the moral authority to be able to stand against whatever attacks come against me for having done what is right.
So take us back to April 19th, 2016. You were a pastor sitting in your church office. Mm-hmm. And this was an interesting moment for you because you felt like you had failed as a parent because you couldn't afford your children's kindergarten costs. Mm-hmm. And that was due to Zimbabwe's hyperinflation. Mm-hmm. So tell us like what you remember feeling in that moment.
It was a very hard moment, Paulina. And one of the things I did in the book when I wrote about it was to really bring out my sense of shame and failure as a parent, because that's the one thing that every parent wants to be able to say, at least I did this. I provided for my family. I provided for my children. And I'm sitting in my office on that particular day when this journey began, having failed to find the funds for my children to attend kindergarten. And it was so difficult because in my mind, my dad had done everything in his power to make sure I got a good education.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that was a difficult moment because I'm sitting there not trying to figure out, okay, do I borrow money from someone? Because you can't borrow money from the banks in Zimbabwe for that because we've got a broken economy, right? The hyperinflation we had gone through in 2008 had left us with inflation running at 236 million%, right? The largest banknote was a $100 trillion note. $100 trillion on one note. And that was not enough to buy 2 loaves of bread, by the way. Okay. And so in 2016, we'd gone through 8 years of trying to rebuild, but the country was going through another collapse. And so for me, the disappointment, the sadness, the shame was that my family, my children were now going to face not only the failure the country was going through, but the failure that their dad had also had within that situation, right? And so that's where it begins, and I think that breaks a person when you feel like I failed to do the most basic thing.
Yeah.
The thing that any parent should be able to say, I did that. It breaks you on the inside. Mm-hmm. And that is part of where the switch was flicked for me to say, I'm not going to allow for either my children to face this or for there to be a day where my children will look back and say, Dad, you did nothing? Mm-hmm. Like you couldn't do anything about it? I didn't want that.
You know what's so interesting? So I think most Americans in particular know about hyperinflation as like an abstract thing that is out there that happens in countries, but never here. My family is from Bulgaria. So my dad in the 90s, Bulgaria had a hyperinflationary event and he was working for the Ministry of Finance and his salary went to like 30 cents a month or something like that. So he was like, so I stopped going to work. But the thing that like kind of imprinted on me, he said a lot of his coworkers kept going to work, even though. So can you just explain, like in practical terms, for somebody who's never lived through hyperinflation, what that does to a community and what is it like in practice? You said you couldn't even like afford bread. Like, how do people live through something like this?
One of the things that it does to a community is that it forces everyone to look at everything in the form of a product and a form of how can I figure out a way through this person or through this opportunity? How can I figure out a way to either extract value or store value? I'll tell you a little story. My late dad in 2008, when we were at the height of super hyperinflation, was buying anything that he could find. And one day he bought 5 bags of salt, like big 50 kg bags of salt. And you don't need that kind of salt for anything. If you're a home, just a regular home. But that was a way to store value. And then what he did was he figured out, okay, if I store the salt, I could either break bulk it and then distribute it and sell it off at small amounts, or I can sell it off at some other point, but I can still get back the value. So it does that too. There's a sense of this survival from not even from day to day, but survival from 1 hour to the next. Because there'll be moments where you're standing in line to buy bread. And part of what happens is that you cannot find basic commodity. So you're standing to buy bread and the money you're holding is losing value whilst you're in the line. And so by the time you get to and this happened to me, by the time you get to the front of the line to buy your bread, what you had that was enough for 2 loaves is now enough for 1 loaf, or is now enough for half a loaf of bread. So it in terms of how your mentality in terms of long-term thinking is affected. You don't think in those long-term frames.
Wow.
You think in very short-term frames. It's about today, getting to the end of today. And when today ends, we figure out tomorrow when tomorrow starts.
Does it also, especially for the young people who are growing up in that kind of environment, build like a deep mistrust of government?
Oh yeah, it does. It does. I think it builds a mistrust of government, but it also builds just a general mistrust in the promise of tomorrow, or the promise of what life can be, the promise of what you can do in the context of a society. Like, will a society allow me to dream? Will a society allow me to pursue my goals? Can I truly be anything I want to be, right? Because we all tell our kids, you can be whatever you want to be, right? Does hard work really pay off? Because you're living in a society where it's not only hard to make things happen, but the few that are making it happen are doing it through corruption, are doing it through bribery, and are doing it through all of these questionable activities. So it starts to affect the way young people are pursuing their own dreams, their own goals, and the way, again, that they're seeing the community that they're living in. Are they part of it to make it better, or are they part of it to extract what they can extract only for themselves?
Yeah, to extract value. That's so interesting. It's like a value extraction model versus a value creation
Exactly.
model.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the thing is, there is a place for value extraction,
of course.
but I think that there has to be a you can't get out what you haven't put in. Right. There has to be a pouring in order for there to be an overflow. Right. And so, and I think this is part of the big struggle and the big battle for young people where I come from, is the idea of what can I do that becomes something that benefits the people in my community and in my country. And in the process, it benefits me too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, so then, sitting in that church office, you did what you never expected to do, which was criticize the government.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
It's I've tried to kind of figure out how that happened, and what I've come back to is the fact that my initial source of frustration was my family.
As it is for many people, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's where I started from. That was my cause. I call it my cause now. I figured out that, wait, if there's one thing that I will stand up for, the one thing that I do not mind getting in trouble for, it is for my family, it's for my children.
And at the time you had 2 children.
Yes, at the time we had 2 children. And actually, my wife was pregnant with our third one at the time. And so I propped up my phone against my Bible in my church, and I didn't really know who you were talking. Yeah, who am I talking to, right? Our church was a small church of about maybe 30 people.
Okay.
And I used to do little videos every now and again, but it was for that small community of people. But this was not for that community. It was just a rant. Paulina, I think I got to a point where I was like, if I can shout at the wall, I'll shout at the wall. Right. And so I record this little video in which I just say, you know what? If you and I are genuinely proud to be Zimbabweans, then what's happening in our country is not good. It's not right. So when you watch the video, you realize that I didn't start out by criticizing the government. I started out by challenging people in terms of, what are you and I prepared to do to make this country better? This is where I started.
Yeah.
What's our role? Who are we expecting to do for us what we won't do for ourselves?
Is that the content of the video?
Yes, that's the content of the video. And then eventually in the video, that's when I eventually say that every time you see this flag fly, because the movement was then called This Flag, and it was based on that, and I was holding the Zimbabwe flag, I said, every time you see this flag fly, it's calling for you to say something, to do something, to say, why must we be in this country? For us to challenge those that are in authority, to say they must fix the country. So it began by speaking to citizens to say, we have no right to complain in a situation where we are not prepared to stand up and to be present for the change that we need.
And at the time, this was a 4-minute video.
Yep, 4 minutes and 11 seconds to be precise. And
when you after you posted it, were you at all thinking of the consequences or repercussions of it, or it was just more of a vent?
It was more of a vent when I began. And I think I kind of justified the repercussions in my mind. I said, you know what, first of all, I am a nobody. Like, this is not going to go anywhere. No one is
Yeah.
going to really listen to it. But I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah.
Because first of all, as a pastor, that's part of what we do in terms of challenging people to be better, challenging people to figure out how to solve problems and issues in their society. So for me, it was less about what danger will I get into and more about, hey, I'm saying something that some people will see and like and comment on, and that will be it. I did not see anything else beyond that, to be honest.
So you record this video, you go home, you go to sleep, you wake up, and your phone is blowing up because the video went viral.
Exactly.
What did you think in that moment? Did you think, oh no, or like, oh good, this is getting...
It was the first reaction. Oh no. Oh no. And part of the reason I thought, oh no, is because of the comments and what people were saying in the comment section, which turned out later on to be quite exciting and quite good. But in those first moments and those first days, it was terrifying to see people say things like, this is the kind of person that we've been waiting for, who can challenge these, people in power. And I'm like, no, wait, that's not what I'm doing. I remember somebody put there and they said, this guy is leading a revolution. We should all get behind it.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm thinking, no. This is not what I am doing. And I try to back out of it a couple of times during those first couple of days by doing a few more videos where I was trying to explain myself and say, no, I wasn't saying this, I was saying that. But what happened was that those videos went even more viral than that first one.
It was almost as if like people hung on to something because they wanted a revolution.
Oh yes. Which is why I've often said to people when they look at my story and they read the book and they say, man, you're such a leader. You were there, it was, and I'm like, I think part of what people miss is that could have been anyone.
Right.
It could have been anyone. People wanted or were looking for a starting point.
Yeah.
And often in a society where people need change or people are trying to figure something out, a lot of people are thinking the same thing, but there's a few people that are willing to put their hand up and say, I'm going to speak up, or I'm going to step up, or hey, I think we should start here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you were the kind of the starting point, because I got to be honest, when we first met and I loosely knew your story, I imagined that the type of guy who would stand up to dictators was somebody who was like very radical, that, the protests had been their entire life. But reading your book, I was like, wait a second, this was very accidental and it came from like a place of peace.
Oh yeah.
And it was just so wild.
I had never done anything of this nature. I had never been involved in activism.
Challenging authority.
None of that. I'd never been part of a political system. I'd never been in civic society. None at all. None at all. But I think also therein also lies a key to seeing some of the biggest things that bring great change or things that impact, where we are, is that it's not always the people that look like they're the ones. Sometimes it's the overlooked person. It's the quiet one. Sometimes
what did you say your dad told you? There's a great quote he's told me.
My dad, man, it's actually the opening quote in the first chapter where he says, be careful, my son, these people are hyenas. And the thing about hyenas is that when they grab a hold of you, they don't let go until they've eaten all of you. And so that's one of the things he said. But there was something my dad also said later on. And he said to me, you will never know how to change the world if you don't know how to serve people. So I think there's a misconception, and I see this when I speak to people in the different places where I speak, where people are waiting for them to be the right person or become the one that looks the part, that has the right qualifications, that has the right resources, that has the right experience and the right validation from their society or affirmation from their society before they step up. And in most cases, again, it's the people that no one is looking at. It's the ideas that people are saying, no, maybe I don't think that one is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
That usually those are the things that spark change or that spark the beginning of something amazing, whether it's an amazing business idea or, or something that impacts people's lives.
I think the quote that I was thinking about was more about the lightning and thunder.
Oh, yes. Oh, the one we spoke about.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can you share that one?
Yeah, it is. It says some people will make up in lightning what some people will make up in thunder what they lack in lightning.
Yes.
Right. Which really kind of it leans into saying that there are sometimes people that shout more and yet have no substance. So yes, I remember that quote now. Yeah, I remember that quote.
It's very good because it does make you think about when there's somebody who's not seeking attention and who's normally very quiet and reserved, yet, like you said, you had a reason, your family, and you spoke on behalf of a nation that had been kind of complacent or self-censoring, and this gave them license. And I think the reason that your movement being called the This Flag movement is so powerful because everybody can get behind this is what the flag means to me.
Exactly.
So it's broad, but also personalized. Oh
yeah. That was an kind of a happy accident with the flag, because that first video I did, the Zimbabwe flag happened to be in my office. So I took it and I began to talk about what the flag means. And, the Zimbabwean flag every color has a meaning. And I began to go through what each color means and what our forefathers kind of said about that. And then I began to talk about what Zimbabwe was like and how this beautiful story and this flag was not being reflected in what we're living out in our lives. And therefore, it was incumbent upon all of us to reclaim the story, the meaning, so that when we see the flag fly, it tells the truth. It's no longer a reminder of something we cannot do, something we cannot have, but it points to something that we're willing to make happen. And so why it was an exciting little accident in that is that the flag became a symbol that united people, but it also became a symbol of resistance. And that was fun to work with because it's for everyone.
Yeah.
It was not a party that people had to join and you were against it. It was about Zimbabwe. It's about our country. So everyone is for the country. So it was fun that happened in that way. And I remember watching it unfold later on, the government trying to get behind it. At one point, they even banned the flag, which was a victory for our movement.
That's crazy.
Wait, they banned the flag off the national? Are you kidding me?
What? That's insane.
But it worked because it more people then began to understand what the movement was about and what we were dealing with.
Well, what you were doing is so challenging because, like you said, this dictatorship had been going on for 40 years. So there was a whole generation that had been born into this. So they didn't know a different Zimbabwe, right?
Exactly.
So you had to kind of explain what it used to be.
Oh, yes.
And I'm curious, because you became this kind of unlikely activist, what the people who knew you best thought about this. So your wife, what was her reaction after that video went viral?
You bring up a really, really good point. The people that knew me best, their first reaction was to protect me. But it was protection by trying to stop me. So it was, you need to stop doing this. Listen, you have to stop. This is dangerous.
So the biggest resistance came from the closest.
Oh, yes. It came from the closest. And you know what? That's often what happens with people is when you start to do something that the people closest to you don't know you for, they're the first ones to jump up and say, this is an intervention. Right. And like I said, it's coming from a good place. They're trying to protect you. They love you. And so for me, that was what happened. It was, yes, my wife, because she was pregnant and we had 2 little ones. It was my church members. It was my brothers and sisters. It was my dad and my mom. Right? It was my friends close to me that said, dude, you have got to be very careful. You think about how about we stop? How about that's enough after we had been going for a month, after we've been going for 2 months and then 3 months. And then when it really blew up. But there came a point afterwards where those groups of people realized that I had become something that they didn't know and were not familiar with. But I was really convinced of this individual I was becoming. Yeah. And it was important for me to stand up for that person that I was becoming.
Wow, that's so interesting. So what I found interesting in the book, which was also shocking to many people in Zimbabwe too, was that you were doing this movement. It was catching fire, especially on social media. Mm-hmm. Yet there was silence from the government where everybody expected the government to jump in and silence you right away. Mm-hmm. First of all, why do you think they let this go on for so long? And then tell us about that phone call you got from an unknown number.
I don't know why in the beginning they kind of let it go for so long, because I started the movement in April of 2016. That's when the first video went out. But I really began to kind of intentionally build a movement or a campaign about a month after that. I started to really lean into it. And there wasn't any real kind of backlash or statement from the government about it. And it was confusing for people who were watching, like you said.
That's kind of even scarier, to be honest.
Oh, yes, it is, because now you don't know.
It's not the expected thing.
You don't know why are they quiet? How come nothing is happening?
Yeah.
And in my mind, I think that part of what was happening was that they were trying to figure out what this was before they came out, because this was very unusual.
It's coming from a pastor, good intentions, good family.
Well, yeah, and who is it? And the thing is, for a dictatorship like the one we had in Zimbabwe and the one we still have in Zimbabwe, frankly, the question is always, why would somebody so weak, so quiet, suddenly speak up, stand up, and do something like
Are they backed by somebody?
Right? What's the agenda? What's going on? Let's figure out what else is happening here. And so I think there was that later on when one of the government ministers then began to publicly castigate us. What he said was that you are being backed by the Americans and you're being backed by the West and the Europeans to cause chaos in the country. And the back and forth we were having was, so what you're telling me is that Zimbabweans do not have it in themselves to think for themselves and to stand up for themselves. We must always be backed
like
by somebody.
Message.
Exactly. And so that became, quite a great discussion, that began to happen on social media, that wait, these guys actually don't think that we are either smart enough or brave enough to stand up to them or to figure out an argument about how things are going. So it was confusing for me. It was confusing for a lot of people. How come nothing is happening to him? How come he keeps speaking and he keeps saying these things, but they're not doing anything to him?
I saw in your book that some people were also like, some conspiracy theories were, he's actually part of the government, and the government is like, what?
And part of it is this, Paulina, is when you're on a journey to doing something that's either never been done before, or something that's very hard to do, any amount of success that you have, especially when you're an underdog, is always going to be questioned.
So true. It'll
be questioned by people who have more experience than you. How can he do more than we did? We've been around for years. It'll be questioned by people that maybe know you and they've known your past record. How can he do something like that? We know his record. We know what he has been able to achieve. He's punching above his weight. He can't be doing this by himself. So people, and I remember sitting back looking at these conspiracy theories And I was thinking to myself, if only they knew.
If only they knew.
That it's just a dude.
Yeah.
And his phone.
That's amazing.
And that's what it was for many months. And I think part of what that allowed us to do was the space for this campaign to grow into what it became, because it became something really big.
And so tell me about the shutdown of July 6, 2016. What did you hope that would accomplish? And is that really when the government took notice?
So on July 6th of 2016, we called a shutdown of the country. Now, the shutdown, we actually called it on the 4th of July, 2016, 2 days before the shutdown. And let me explain a little bit of the reason or maybe how we got to the shutdown.
Yes. And sorry, just include, because I forgot to follow up on you did get some sort of like anonymous call that could have been somebody from the government, but unclear.
I did get a phone call. I was at my office, at the church office again. It had been a couple of weeks into the start of this campaign, and I got an anonymous phone call that threatened and said, "What are you doing? Why are you abusing the flag and doing what you're doing?" And I remember thinking it was a prank to begin with, and then discovered, no, this is not a prank. And what the person said on the other side was, their exact words were, "That flag around your neck could strangle you."
Oh my gosh.
And when the weird things, when they said that, I was in my office, the flag was actually around my neck. So I thought they were watching me.
Got it.
But it turns out that they'd probably seen me earlier on. I don't know. Maybe I was under surveillance or something, but I had been carrying my flag with me regularly. Now, one of the campaigns we had started was to say to people who were joining the movement, as a sign of saying enough is Zimbabwe, take your flag with you everywhere you go. So it was a silent protest in which you didn't have to confront anyone or go on the street or shout or march. Just carry your flag. People will know. Yes. If they know the movement, they'll know what you're saying.
Got it. So
by seeing your flag.
That was kind of like the initial quote unquote protest, but then the shutdown happened.
Then the shutdown. And how the shutdown happened was the government was introducing another currency in 2016
to help with the hyperinflation.
Exactly. And remember that first currency from 2008 had failed completely and was eventually scrapped. And Zimbabwe literally switched to using US dollars. Our whole economy was using US dollars. We were using rands from South Africa as well, but mainly we became a US dollar economy. And so they thought, hey, we're going to introduce another currency.
Oh, no.
And so exactly, all of us were like, no. And we, at that time, the movement was just beginning to gain traction. So I spoke up again and I said, you see, these are the things that I keep talking about, that these people keep doing this to us and we keep silent. We have to say something.
Yeah.
So we challenged the governor of the Reserve Bank. I remember this. And we said to him, he had said in a statement, I'm willing to meet anyone and explain my new currency to you and how it's going to succeed and how it'll be 1-to-1 exchange rate with the US dollar. And so I remember a friend of mine, I said to him, I'm going to challenge him to this. Let's call him out on it and say, hey, let's meet and do a debate about it. He's going to say no. And when he says no, we'll go back to the movement and we'll say to people, see, they're liars. They don't want to talk to anyone. But Paulina, what happened was that he agreed to do the debate. And that was weird because we didn't have a plan. We were not ready for a debate. We were just, our plan was he's going to say no.
Right.
And so he said yes. And I remember my friend and I, we quickly threw together a plan. And eventually we agreed to the debate. We were supposed to do it in a citizen space that we had looked for. He refused and said, no, I'll get attacked there. You got to come and do the debate in the Reserve Bank building, which was, for me, was like, oh no, that's my worst fear.
Because it's not a neutral space.
It's not a neutral space. The power dynamics in that, but this was the opportunity, right?
Right.
Do we back down or do we go for it? Do we really believe in this thing or are we just...
Because you were probably both kind of calling each other's bluffs. You thought he would say no. Then he probably thought you guys would not.
Exactly. right? And so we end up there and we have the most amazing debate where we have...
How many people showed up?
Oh man, I think we probably had about 500
Wow.
people showed up for the debate with their flags into the Reserve Bank building. And we thought people would refuse to come because when we announced that we were going to do a public debate with the governor and we said to people, we need you to come. Yeah. It's not going to be me debating. It's going to be you. I need just ordinary people to come. People wrote back to us and they're like, you're kidding. You're out of your mind. Like, we're not showing up there with our faces. We have to produce our IDs to get into the building. They'll follow us. We'll disappear. They'll torture us. We're not going to do it. So we thought, man, this is going to fail, but we're going to have to show up. So we did, but that debate, even though it was successful in terms of how we challenged the governor, they didn't listen to us. They decided that they were still going to carry on with introducing this currency. That's when we then decided we have to do something else here that is even more dramatic, that makes more of a statement that it's not just a small group of people. It's not just on Facebook. People are tired of this. Now, in Zimbabwe, it's illegal to protest on the streets.
Okay.
Without permission from the government. You cannot protest the government without permission from the government, right? Even though the Constitution gives us the rights to protest, you're not allowed to do it.
But when you're living a dictatorship,
that's how that works, right? So we decided, why don't we do something that is a reverse of going on the street? Instead, we ask people to stay at home and we shut the country down. We choose a day in the middle of the week where it's obvious that this is a working day.
Right.
And we ask people not to go to work, not to take their kids to school, not to open their businesses, not to go to shop. Yeah. Do not shop. Don't go to the bank. Go nowhere. Wow. Stay off the streets. Stay inside. And let's bring the whole country to a complete standstill.
And the idea was to send a message to the government.
Yes. The idea was, this is a protest, number one, to say we don't want the currency that you're about to introduce. This is how strongly we all feel about it. That's number one. And number two, to be able to say to them, we, the people, have the power.
Yeah.
And I think that's this message they got more than the first one of that we didn't want the currency. They understood this idea of, wait a minute, these people are actually getting together. And so on the 6th of July, I called this thing. I did a video that I sent out and said, hey, if anyone is watching this video, if this movement has meant anything to you, if everything I've been doing for the last 3 months, recording videos, challenging the governor for debates, and talking about what's wrong in our country and trying to figure out together with you what you and I can do, if any of it has made any sense, then this is the call to action I'm asking you to do. Just one day. Just one day. And I know it's hard for you and I because one day's wages and income means a lot to us. But if there cannot be any change if there is no sacrifice for it. So we made that call. The video went out, and in 48 hours, it was one of the most incredible things that I have ever seen.
Because you knew this would. If it worked, you'd be in danger. So you went to a safe house.
I was actually living in a safe house.
But then you took a ride to see.
Oh, yes. And I'll send you the video, by the way, of me driving around the city.
We'll include it in the...
Yeah. And so I was with my friends. We were in this safe house and we couldn't help it. We wanted to see, has it worked? And we were seeing pictures that people were posting on social media in their area and it was empty. And I remember thinking, oh my God.
Wow.
What have we done?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a sense of awe, but there was a sense of, okay, if we thought we were in trouble before, now we know this is going to be. And we drove out into the city and it was just empty. Everything was shut down. People had stayed in their homes. And so once that happened, and I remember that very day, the government actually shut down the internet, the whole country. They shut the whole thing down. The government
shut the internet
down. Oh, yes. They shut it down completely. And it made it worse because now no one could communicate. Nobody knew what was happening. So now people really stayed at home. But the next day it was over, and as people were going up and about, the police began to look for me. And so eventually, I had to come out of hiding. I was in hiding for about a week and a half.
But they went to your home where your wife was.
Oh yeah, they did. They went to my home. They threatened my wife. And that's eventually when I then got out of hiding and handed myself over.
And you turned yourself
in. I was handed myself over, and then I was eventually charged, arrested and charged and kept in prison. And
what were you charged with?
Initially, they charged me with inciting violence, and then they changed.
Inciting violence by telling people to stay home.
And there was no violence. I mean, and by the way, one of our big parts of the campaign, whenever I did a call to action, I always ended by saying no violence and let's pray for our country. And so I guess they were desperate. And so they came and they said he was causing alarm and despondency and was causing violence. Then eventually they changed that to a treason charge. And then they said, he was attempting to overthrow a constitutional government, which was so far from what we were trying to do.
There's a powerful photo that I saw of you handcuffed, holding a Bible and the flag. That is an iconic photo. But you looked very calm and almost like I know what I'm doing, and I know that this is the consequence of what I've done. What was running through your head in that moment?
First of all, you cannot get away from the kind of fear that comes in those moments. If you ever meet anyone that tells you I was not afraid, they're not really telling you the truth. I think that picture was taken after I'd spent, a night or 2 nights in prison. And it was a very difficult experience in terms of the way I was treated and the kind of torture that they put me through. But there was an incredible sense of destiny, of being on a mission. And I always say to people, there are journeys that you choose, and then there are journeys that choose you. And I remember being in this mindset of, this is not about me. It's about these amazing people that have dreams, that have voices, that have a future that they want to live in. And if it means that I, as an individual, go through the kind of suffering that leads to more people having access to rights and having, access, then it's worth it. Then it is worth it. And so that was part of the thought process, during that time, that it's not about me. It's about all of these. I'm not being persecuted because of Ivan. I'm being persecuted because of what this could mean for everyone, for everyone else.
And that, I think that speaks to when you were in prison, people began gathering outside the courthouse to kind of demand that you're released. And it says by the afternoon, more than 1,000 people were there. In the book, you write that seeing the demonstrators kind of lit a fire within you because you had been in this awful cell, going through things, and that really, brought some darkness. But then seeing these people, it kind of lit a fire.
I always talk about the miracle after the disaster, and the fact that the previous night, I was in really bad shape in that prison. And all I wanted was to go home. I wanted to make sure my family was okay. I hadn't had any news from my wife. In one of the torture sessions we'd had, they had threatened my family whilst I was in there. And so I didn't know whether they were okay. And all I wanted was to know that they were okay. And so when I heard that people were gathering at the courts spontaneously, I had called campaigns and the protest before. But this gathering that was happening at the courts just before I was brought there for the trial is a gathering I had not called.
Right.
And this was exciting for me,
took on
Paulina.
a life of itself.
Oh my gosh. It was amazing because it was the result of everything we'd been doing for 3 months. It was people finally getting to the point of saying, I'm not waiting for anyone to call me. I'm not waiting for anyone to convince me. I'm not waiting for Ivan to drop a video. I'm going myself to the court.
And they're doing something illegal, which is protesting in public.
And I'm showing up with my face. there, like one of the most dangerous things you can do. And I remember being being given almost like an hourly update by the police who were about to take me from the police station to the courts. And they said to me, we're delayed. We can't go because there's about 200 people that have gathered there at the courts. They're praying and they're saying they're there and they won't leave until you're released. And they came back and they said there's about 500 now. And then they came back and they said there's about 1,000. And I'm like, 1,000? And he says, yes, but we're sending the riot police. They'll be beaten and cleared in no time. By the time we got to the courts, which was about 7 p.m., by the way, I was supposed to be taken to the courts by 8 a.m. So by 7 p.m., by the time we got to the courts, there was easily 8, 9, 10,000 people gathered at the courts. It was the most incredible sight that I had ever seen. They had candles. People were making sandwiches from home to bring them to feed people because they were like, we're not leaving. And they were calling each other, wherever you are, get to the court. We're going to stand, yes, for Ivan, but we're standing up until you release this guy. I cannot tell you the emotion that I was going through. It was sweet. It was beautiful. And it really did in that moment, it really did make up. It made up for the pain I'd gone through the night before, the anguish, the fear that I'd had seeing this happen, that it worked. That the people that they said were weak, scared, and couldn't do anything, they found their courage and they stood up to him. If it ends here, we have won.
Oh man, that's incredible. So, I'm just going to kind of summarize what happened next, but people should buy the book and read it. You eventually end up, they release you, then they rearrest you. You end up escaping Zimbabwe, going first to South Africa and then to the United States with your wife and kids. And this is the part that just blows my mind. So you're in the US 6 months and you turn to your wife and you say, listen, like I need to go back to Zimbabwe. And you had a 2-month-old at the time. Your wife's recovering from like a difficult childbirth. And you had 2 other children too. Why did you decide to go back?
That's always a very difficult question for me to answer because of the kind of weight that brought on my family. Having put them in danger already before, and then managed to escape together with my family into safety, to then come to a place of saying, I'm going to go back and I'm going to leave you here with the children. You've just given birth. It was a difficult decision. I was coming from a place of feeling the weight of having started something in Zimbabwe that was so hopeful, that had ignited this passion within people who had never spoken truth to power had done it. They had stepped up and I had left.
Yeah, you felt like it wasn't finished.
That ate me up.
Yeah.
It wasn't finished. And, again, being a Christian, for me, I felt like this was not an accident. There was purpose to this.
Yeah.
This happened for a reason. And so that was the decision for me to go back. And I take my hat off to my wife. She was so gracious.
Yeah.
I mean, she just didn't say yes. Of course, you go through a lot.
Yeah.
But she allowed me to make that decision. And so I left my family here and I went back to Zimbabwe. And I think what made it hard was knowing that going back meant that I would meet with a fair amount of hardship. And that's exactly what happened. Landed at the airport on my arrival and was arrested immediately and sent off to the maximum security prison.
And that's no joke, that one, right?
No, that Chikurubi maximum security prison is the harshest prison in Zimbabwe. And that was a difficult experience. But even through that, there were some amazing moments that contributed to me carrying on the work of speaking truth to power, of organizing people and helping people find their courage.
Eventually, the dictator, Robert Mugabe, who had been there, he eventually stepped down. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that your movement played a role in it.
Oh, yeah, we did. We absolutely played a role in that.
But then it wasn't really like democracy came.
No, it wasn't. And I think it's part of what disappoints me, but also part of what makes me realize the process and the journey of something like this. The person who took over was Robert Mugabe's right-hand man. And unfortunately, Zimbabwe became worse under his rule. And I remember making this statement when the corruption was carrying on. And I said in a public statement, if you do to us what Robert Mugabe did to us, we will do to you what we did to him. And I think a lot of people thought it was an empty threat, and they thought, you'll never do anything. And, but we challenged him again. And I remember in January of 2019, Robert Mugabe stepped down in 2017, end of 2017. We went through 2018, things began to go bad. And in 2019, we put together another protest again. And January 14, 2019, once again, we were able to bring the country to a complete standstill. And again, it was testament to the amazing people of Zimbabwe who wanted to participate and stand up. And of course, they retaliated. They released the military into the neighborhoods. They beat people. There was an abduction attempt of me in my house in the middle of the night, which failed. But then early in the morning, the police came through and were able to force their way into my house. And I was arrested by 18 armed police officers and went straight back to Chikurubi maximum security prison. But at that point, arrests for me had sadly become a regular occurrence. And something that I now knew was going to be a consequence of some of these actions. So I would prepare myself for those moments. And some of those moments were some of the most impactful, where I was able sometimes to have frank conversations with arresting officers who came to arrest me, and obviously discovered that these were people that were just on a job, but people that also believed in what I was doing because it would benefit their families. Yeah. I met prisoners in prison who helped me find my own courage, whom I helped find their own courage as well. So there was a usefulness to all of these experiences, and I look back on them with a certain amount of celebration and thankfulness for the things I learned, the people I met, and what we were able to accomplish.
I love that. And for more on your story, people can check out the book. But just my final question is, I want to leave people with this. So in your church office, you had a small plaque on the wall that read, "Start where you are with what you have, and the world will respond to your passion." What does that quote mean to you, and how can we as listeners apply that to our own life?
We cannot wait until we feel like we are enough according to the standards that are set around us. We live in a world that gives us a picture of what the ideal change maker looks like, or what the ideal entrepreneur looks like, or what the ideal, whatever it is that you want to be. And a lot of people are striving to be that so that they feel like they can be the person that they see themselves as. But that's not how it works. You start where you are with what you have. If it's nothing, you start with nothing. You take the first step. One of the things I talk about in the book is that I learned when we were building the movement, that if I only knew what to do now, that was enough, because people were asking us as we were building the movement, "So Ivan, what's next? What's next?" And eventually I had to say to them, "I don't know what's next." And some people said, "So you're not serious. So you don't know what you're doing." But it was knowing what I needed to do now and doing it that opened the door to what I needed to do next. So start where you are. You cannot wait until you know everything. You cannot wait until everyone knows you. You cannot wait until you have all the resources, because that day will probably not come. The resources come as you do. Networks come as you go, as you start. Ideas come when you put that first idea that seems impossible or weird or stupid into motion. You get the next idea of what to do. So that's what that statement on my church wall meant.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Paulina. It's been my absolute pleasure.
It was great.